Good morning. Welcome to Christian Companions. This is our 55 and older Sunday school class. It normally meets at 10:30 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Unfortunately, for the time being, we were not meeting in person. We're just doing video. So if you stumble upon this and you're confused, it's because we go through a curriculum. And so if you'd like to join us, feel free to contact the church, contact me, and you can get a book. And it's free. You can just participate as you like. But for everybody else that has been here before and is going through the book, hello and good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, whenever you're watching this. We are 5 weeks in, I think, to the new quarter. If you haven't noticed, this whole quarter has been about love. First, going through Joseph's life a little bit. They titled them Biased Love. There was, oh boy, trying to remember, Obedient Love. A few other loves in there. I'm not going to cycle through all of them. But today is a love that intercedes. It's in 1 Samuel 19, 1-7. So we go from Joseph in Egypt, skip through all the books of the law, the conquest, and what would be next? Esther, and then get to 1 Samuel. So, and then we even skip all of Samuel and get straight to David. And this is mostly about Saul anyway. So 1 Samuel 19, 1-7 is where we are. And you know what? Let's just jump in. I know I say this every week. I'm going to say it again. This is mostly narrative. Narrative doesn't have a lot to unpack. There's not fun words and nuances and different things that happen. It's just kind of a straightforward story, and we can talk about it if something comes up, or if you're interested, or if you find something and want to talk to me or email me, maybe we can talk about it later. But this might be quick because of that, because narrative is a story. So basically, we're just telling a story. So 1 Samuel 19, 1-7. I'm going to grab a drink before I read this verse. Okay, that'll help. 1 Samuel 19, 1-7. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning, go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out." Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him, "Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason?" Saul listened to Jonathan and took his oath. "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death." So Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. Yes, so quick introduction and context for what you need to know. So, introduction. What risks do peacemakers face in areas of conflict? A study begun in 2010 by the Uppsala Conflict Data Program, the UCDP, just kidding, nobody knows it like that. I'll keep going, seeks to answer that question. The fact that such a study exists confirms the sad truth that we all know. Peacemakers sometimes come to very violent ends. A government that doesn't want outside influence can forcefully remove peaceful humanitarian efforts. One side or another of a military conflict might attack the peacemakers, hoping that the aid they would have given to their opponents will result in victory. Or one individual who stands opposed to a specific peacemaker can kill that one, hoping the movement will end with his or her death. We need only recall conflicts in Syria or Sudan, or assassinations like those of Martin Luther King Jr. or Roscoe Romero, to realize that peacemaking can be a very dangerous business. There is no guarantee that efforts for reconciliation will work, but Jonathan, son of King Saul, believed the risk was worth taking. His actions are an example to all of us about the potential power of peacemaking. Oh boy. Bear with me today. I don't know if I can't see or if I can't talk, but something's going wrong. Jonathan's stepping into a very difficult role as both son of a powerful man, but also trying to bring peace to a situation between a friend and a king, a person and a king. especially a man that he knows to be violent. So, interesting. Lesson context. Two of the Old Testament books of history are 1st and 2nd Samuel. They take their names from Samuel, the last judge of Israel. He was instrumental in the transition from the period of the judges to the time of kings. As such, the two books record the transition from theocracy, when the Lord reigned as sole king of Israel, with human leaders in the roles of judges, to the monarchy of human kings. This transition began about the year 1050 BC. It began with the Israelites' demand that Samuel give them an earthly king, such as all the other nations have, 1 Samuel 8:5. This demand was not primarily a rejection of Samuel or his sons, but of the Lord as their king. God had called Israel to be his special nation, and their desire for a king expressed a wish to be not quite so special. Samuel proclaimed the Lord's warning of the negative consequences of a human king, but the people persisted, and the Lord granted their request. The Lord selected Saul as the first king of Israel. Saul started well, but when he failed to carry out faithfully the Lord's commands, the Lord selected a different king. Samuel informed Saul of his being rejected by God, and Samuel anointed David as the next king. That signified that Saul's royal line would end when David took the throne. When the Philistines challenged Israel, it was young David who slew Goliath, which in turn led to a routing of the Philistines. After this great victory, David became a member of Saul's royal household in two important ways. First, David and Jonathan, Saul's son and heir to the throne, became fast friends. Second, David married Michal, daughter of Saul. When military victories were celebrated, however, Paul esteemed David's accomplishments more highly than Saul's. This made Saul angry, jealous, and suspicious of David to the point that Saul attempted to kill him. Yeah, it's probably one of my favorite little tidbits of this story is after they went to battle, Saul and David both came back, and the people sang a song to the conquering heroes. Saul has killed 10,000, or Saul has struck down thousands. David has killed his 10,000s. It's just, yeah, I mean, I don't want to blame Saul too much because I think a little bit of you would be upset too. Like if your wife made a meal or your spouse made a meal and then a friend also made some food and brought it over and you're like, my wife has made food, my friend has made delicious food. I think, or your spouse, whatever. I think your wife would have problems, right? Like if you said, honey, this is delicious, but man, what she made, way better, you're going to have issues. Same thing when people are singing in the streets, hey, Saul killed 1,000, but David killed 10,000. That started to sow the seeds of doubt within Saul's mind, I think. Anyhow, I just like that a little bit. I think it's funny. So, probably wasn't funny at the time. Just going to throw that out there. David probably wasn't too excited about it. Neither was Saul, clearly. I digress from my digression. Let's get into it. 1 Samuel 1a. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. So the commentary says this. This verse continues the story of 1 Samuel 18, giving the consequences of Saul's jealous rage. We may wonder why Saul would charge his attendants to implement the deadly deed of killing David, the deadly deed of killing David, excuse me. The word translated attendants occurs more than 800 times in the Old Testament with a broad range of applications. It applies to various levels of service to the kings, not just what we might term butlers and maids. Faithful subjects of a king were considered to be servants. Notice the progression. Saul had tried to kill David by his own hand, then by stealth by putting David in peril. That's 1 Samuel 18, 17, and 25. The text before us represents a new attempt. It involved not Saul himself or the Philistines, but instead his son and his court. So yeah, Saul has slowly become unhinged at the idea of who David is and probably knowing in his heart of hearts that this boy is going to take him over one day. So he's finally he went from discreet to full on, I'm just going to kill this guy. 1b, but Jonathan had taken a great liking to David. Excuse me, the commentary says this. The author interjects this important detail to remind us of Jonathan's potentially split allegiance. Emphasizing Jonathan's relationship to his father, Saul ratchets up the tension. Would Jonathan's loyalty to his father and potentially his own future place on the throne determine his path, or would his great liking for David decide Jonathan's course of action? The situation was made more problematic by the covenant between Jonathan and David, which is in 1 Samuel 18, 3 and 4. It should prevent Jonathan from obeying his father's orders to kill David, In order to save his friend and honor their covenant, Jonathan would have to disobey his father, and the king could certainly punish his son any way he saw fit for such an act of rebellion. And I don't know if it was last quarter or when it was. I feel like we talked about it in here. This isn't the only time that Saul. I don't know. We don't know if Saul knew about Jonathan and David's covenant, but this isn't the only time that Jonathan and Saul had a covenant broken between them, or a potential covenant broken between them. There's a time where Jonathan goes into battle, and I kind of remember where that is. Jonathan goes into battle away from the army. So he kind of separates with his armor bearer and goes and kills the Philistines by himself. And Saul makes a covenant right then and there and says, if anybody eats before we win, that person's going to die. And since Jonathan was off fighting and not nearby to hear this covenant, he ate something, and all the soldiers were like, "Woe are you? You're going to die because your father made this oath." It's back in 1 Samuel 14. Saul's rash vow, and he says we should. And basically, the only reason he doesn't die is because the people say he doesn't need to die because he didn't hear your vow. So, just that kind of goes to show the heart of King Saul and a little bit of Jonathan. Jonathan's more of the good guy in the story, but Saul was quick to make and break deeply spiritual relationships and events. That's part of the reason why he started falling out as king. He made a sacrifice, and he made it basically an illegal sacrifice without Samuel present. And that's the start of Samuel going, this isn't working out, man. Like, you can't just make a sacrifice just because you're king. Like, you have to wait for me, the priest and prophet. Like, that's not acceptable. So Saul is often doing this thing. I mean, he's seeking to kill a man. That also doesn't help. That's kind of breaking a covenant of sorts as well. And so, that's just interesting that it's levels of Saul's character and personality that come out throughout this text. 1 and 2 Samuel are two of my favorite books because of you can see so many different layers of personality in different people. I think the first recorded serial killer is in here because there's it's not Abner. I think it's Joab. Yeah, Joab kills 3 people in the same way, and I believe 2 of them are in the same place in the gateway of the city. And so this man's like kills 3 people purposefully. Like, he's legitimately like a serial killer. It's crazy. But there's layers and levels to each person's character that you see built up in different ways. It's fascinating. And this is one for Saul. But the covenant they speak of here, 1 Samuel 18:3 and 4, it makes their friendship in our language today very uncomfortable. I'll put it that way. This is what it says. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house, speaking of David. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul, and Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. So, yeah, in our frame of mind, that's very uncomfortable, right? To say that you're so close as friends that your souls are knit together, that's verbiage we don't typically use of friends. And the idea of taking the clothes off your back and all your prized possessions and giving to a friend as a sign of a covenant is also strange. But that being said, this is just to say that they were brothers, and I think you can even see that a little bit in Saul and Jonathan's relationship, as well as Saul and David's relationship, because David is closer to Jonathan than Saul is closer to Jonathan, right? David and Jonathan have a closer relationship than even Jonathan and his father. So that's, I think, again, adds to the tension, adds to the layers, and to do this, to give him the clothes off his back and his armor and his stuff, it's to say, you have whatever you need of mine is yours. Like this is the covenant that I will give you anything. Like I am here for you in all sorts of ways. So this is a strong relationship, strong friendship, a strong bond and covenant that they have. So 2a. And warned him, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. So the commentary, the reader doesn't wait long in suspense. Jonathan clearly chose his love for David over his devotion to his father, the king. I like the word choice there, love versus devotion. That's kind of what we're looking at. The role of a son was to honor his father, which included obeying him. Jonathan's informing David of Saul's pronouncement undermined his father's will. Since the Lord had rejected Saul in favor of David, the contrast highlights for the reader Saul's opposition to the will of God. It may also show Jonathan's acceptance of David's place as the future king rather than himself, and thus as a man who followed God's will. No doubt there was a full conversation between Jonathan and David, but only Jonathan's revelation of Saul's plot is reported. Jonathan's warning consisted of 1, the report, 3 commands, and 4 actions Jonathan will take. That's good. 1, the report, 2, 3, and 3, 4. Anyway, is looking for emphasizes Saul's very active desire to have David put to death. He was not just daydreaming. The king was coming up with plans to kill David. Yeah, he was seeking out to kill this man. So yeah, I think this is more revealing of Jonathan's character than anything. Jonathan, if you're this close of friends, Jonathan has to know what David's intention, but also what what the will of God is for David's life. He knows he's not going to be king over Israel. In fact, he might fully well know that when David comes to the throne, Saul's line will end. So he might even know that he's probably not going to make it out of this fairly well. And so to not only dishonor your father, but go against the will of a king for the will of God is, again, a significant thing, a significant qualifier for the character of this man, for this person. 2c, excuse me. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Grammatically, a request and a command appear the same. Determining whether Jonathan commanded David so that David needed to obey him, or requested of David so that David could make up his own mind, is a matter of context. Considering each man's status relative to the other's leads to an impasse. At the moment, Jonathan is of higher status because he is the king's son and heir apparent to the throne. However, he and David both knew that David had been chosen by God to be the next king. Furthermore, a warning, though it comes as a command, can be softened by the concern of the one who issues it. One can imagine that Jonathan, though apparently ordering David to do what he said, would have been open to other suggestions as long as they were intended to keep David safe from harm. The fact that the warning, be on your guard, is followed by tomorrow morning, indicated that the threat was an immediate danger. This was not the kind of general take care advisory with which we end casual conversations today. Yeah, if my daughter is running and she doesn't see that she's about to fall down the stairs, I yell, stop. That's not, that's both I guess that's both a request and a command, because it's like, you're going to hurt yourself. I need you to stop. It's the same thing here. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Like, you need to be prepared. I'm not telling you what to do, but you should probably listen to me. I guess it's not really heading for the stairs. It's more like she's grabbing a pair of scissors, maybe. That's a bad analogy. We can let the commentary just be the commentary, but we'll keep going. 2D, go into hiding and stay there. These two imperatives reveal Jonathan's intention to give David an active yet passive part in the plan. The active part was for David to hide himself. The passive part is to stay there after he did. So Jonathan did not know if his attempt to convince his father not to kill David would succeed, thus his precautionary measure. Yeah, that speaks for itself, really. Excuse me. Yeah, he's going to plea, and so he's like, stay close, but be prepared to run. Anyway, 3A. Keep moving. Actually, let's do 3A and 3B. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out. So 3A, first of all, I will point out a shift of focus from David's task to Jonathan's. The first pair seen here describes where Jonathan would be, standing with David's sworn enemy in the same field near David. Apparently, the secret place where David was to hide would be secret only from Saul, not from Jonathan. Therefore, David would be completely vulnerable in trusting Jonathan not to betray him. Just fair. And then 3b, Jonathan's second pair of actions describes what he planned to say, first to Saul, then to David. Once again, David would have to trust that Jonathan planned to tell him everything that he needed to know to survive. Yeah, and I think David trusts fully in God's word, and therefore in Jonathan, because Jonathan made a covenant before God, and David knows Jonathan's heart. So I don't think there's any... I feel like the commentary is kind of implying that David had a reason to be weary. Leery? Leery or weary? Probably both. A little of both. To be leery of what Jonathan was doing, hiding in the field so close to Saul. But I don't think there's any nuance there. I think he knew I think it was more stay close, so when I'm done talking, I can come get you. Anyway. 4a. Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, "Let not the king do wrong to his servant David." So Jonathan's intercession with Saul leaves the reader to assume that David had already done what Jonathan required. Once again, Saul's position as Jonathan's father is emphasized. This brings to mind the complicated responsibilities Jonathan had toward him. The expression "let not the king" in third person is more polite than a bald command, "do not." Jonathan's address of his father as king may be designed to calm Saul's insecurity over his kingship. We also recall that resisting kings was dangerous. In the law of Moses, before the existence of kings in Israel, disobeying priests and judges was punishable by death, Deuteronomy 17. This practice extends to kings in Israel in that they had power over life and death of their subjects, as did kings in the surrounding nations. However, Jonathan's address also reminded the king that he had a duty to God not to do wrong against others. Although might makes right seems to have been the rule throughout history, God's people are to be different. We live by standards given by the Lord, not rules determined by people. For this reason, Saul did not have the moral authority to have David killed. That would go against God's injunctions about killing innocent people, which even the king is meant to obey and uphold. David is identified as Saul's servant by the use of this term. Jonathan describes David as a faithful member of Saul's court, just like the attendants of verse 1. Yeah, I think this is Jonathan addressing his father and king. And when your dad's king, I imagine you have some level of formality you feel you have to address, especially when it's clearly a violent man that's a little mentally unhinged because he's trying to just kill people left and right. But yeah, let not the king do wrong to his servant. Reassuring him, David's your servant, you need to calm down. But in subtle tones towards the king. 4b, he has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. Commentary, again, has not wronged you means David had done nothing to bring harm to Saul. In fact, David was committed to supporting the king as the anointed of the Lord. Even though Saul was seeking David's life, what David has done and has benefited Saul greatly refers to all the noble acts David has done in service to King Saul. These include not just military service, but also playing the harp to soothe Saul in his times of distress. Yeah, David's been nothing but faithful. He's a young man. He's doing his best, and he's so committed to God that when God said, "You will be the next king, just wait it out," he truly took that to heart. We see that time and time again in David and Saul's relationship. Saul will try and kill David again. David spares Saul's life multiple times. Even when Saul is killed and David hears about his death, he seeks out the one that killed Saul because he killed the Lord's anointed. Like, that's how seriously David takes it. Even though this man tried to kill him, even though this man stood in the way of his throne and his kingship, when he is killed, he seeks out the killers because the Lord had anointed this person. And that is significant, especially to David. So, yeah, we'll keep going. 5a. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistines. The Lord won a great victory, or killed the Philistine. Man, the Lord won a great victory for all Israel. Now, this is why it's important. David had risked his own life for Saul in killing the Philistine, Goliath. Though everyone else in the army had been too afraid to confront the giant, David had trusted in the Lord's protection and his intention to defeat the Philistines. Because of his faith in God, David was able to brave Goliath's threats and use the skills learned as a shepherd to defeat and kill Israel's fearsome enemy. The result the Lord had granted Israel through David was nothing less than a great victory over an oppressive foe, the Philistines. Man, Jonathan mentioned only the military deeds of David. Those and other victories were the cause of David's popularity, which in turn was the cause of Saul's deadly jealousy and planned to execute David for that reason. For that reason, reminding Saul that David's popularity was a result of his service to the king could soothe the king's feelings that he had been usurped. Yeah, I mean, hearing the song, Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s, probably a good leader should be like, yeah, I have one of the great warriors in my army. Well done. Like this, if it's Saul could have easily, hindsight's 2020, Saul could have easily just been like, yeah, I found this kid. This kid came to the camp. He killed Goliath. I'm the one that promoted him. You're welcome, world. I got David here for you. That's a little self-centered of him, but still, it's better than trying to kill him. Just throwing that out there. I'd rather somebody be selfish than homicidal. I know it might be a hot take, but there it is. 5b, and you saw it and were glad. And then Jonathan pointed out Saul's eyewitness status in reaction to the defeat of Goliath. Saul had appreciated David's service, not only at that time, but also when David played the harp to comfort him in his affliction. Yeah. Self-explanatory there, too. If you can't hear, my voice is going out pretty sharp and pretty quick. We only have 2 verses left, though, so bear with me. 5c, why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? So Jonathan concluded his argument by returning to his beginning exhortation, couching it as a rhetorical question. Such a question is designed to make a point rather than seek information. The answer here was obvious to the king. He should not kill David because then the king himself would become guilty and deserving of death. Calling David an innocent man refers specifically to David's manner of living. David had acted faithfully as a servant in the court of Saul. David had never given Saul a reason for Saul's anger and retribution. Yeah, it's not like he's sowing seeds of deceit among the allies. It's not like he's trying to usurp the throne or kill the royal family or anything. He's just being a servant, and he's just following the will of God. So, anyhow, verse 6. Saul listened to Jonathan and took his oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. The commentary says this: Jonathan's argument had the desired effect. Listen to means to heed. That is both to hear and act in accordance with what was said. I think I talked about that recently, the difference between listening and hearing. Because my music teacher used to always say, I know you hear me, but are you listening? Because listening implies that you're putting it into action. Anyway, similarly, the Exodus from Egypt was initiated because God not only listened to, but acted on the groaning of the children of Israel. Jonathan's intervention thus culminated in Saul's taking an oath that David would not be put to death. Taking an oath or making a vow is equivalent to making a covenant. It is quite to Saul's credit that he relented from his own call for David's execution. Although Saul had a history of rebellion against the Lord, in this case, he honored God by heeding wise counsel and choosing not to sin against David. Yeah, how would that work out in the future, though? The Lord expected the king to keep his vow. Deuteronomy 23:21-23 declares that vows must be kept, while Ecclesiastes 5:4-6 reminds the reader that breaking a vow angers the Lord. By swearing that David will live, Saul bound himself to do all in his power to protect David. And then isn't it interesting also that when Jesus comes, he says, don't vow yourself or anything. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Imagine if that had been the case here. Like you just said, instead of taking a vow, you just said, yeah, I'll do that. Leave it at that. Then maybe when he immediately goes back on his word in chapter 19, or not chapter 19, excuse me. We're in chapter 20. Chapter 21, yeah. I mean, he immediately goes back on his word. That's what I'm getting at. Maybe it would be as bad for him. So, verse 7. So Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. So the commentary, David emerged from his prearranged hiding place after hearing Jonathan's call. As promised, Jonathan reported to David everything that had happened. This would have included especially Saul's change of heart and his vow not to put David to death. For David to return to Saul's presence indicates that David believed Jonathan completely and no longer had any fear that Saul would try to kill him. The result of all of Jonathan's efforts was that David resumed his place in Saul's court as before. This phrase calls back to mind how well David and Saul had worked together initially. The reader is left to wonder, in view of Saul's past behavior toward David, how long this peace will be observed. Whoops, I spoiled that. It won't. But, yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, he's restored back to his position. He gets to go back, but like I said, it's not going to last long. It's Saul's heart, Saul's character, Saul's whatever you want to call it. He will go back on his word pretty quickly. Yeah, I think that's it. I had something come to mind, but now off the top of my head, I can't remember it. But if it were important, I think I would remember. But I think it was just some little caveat to verse 7 that wasn't important. So if you have anything that stuck out to you or you need help with or questions or anything like that, you can find me at the church. I'm here on Sundays. Just wait around. I'm usually in the back, but because I'm the online person, you usually see me there. Other than that, questions, comments, concerns, you can email me, samuelo@southrockchristian.com. You can call the church Monday through Thursday. I'm here from 9 to 4. And I think that's it. As always, I miss you all so much. I wish you were in this room. As always, I really do, because I miss writing on my board. I miss fielding questions and having conversations about philosophy and theology, even when it's narrative and I just kind of blow through it because there's not a lot to expound on, but without questions at least. So anyhow, I hope you all are well, and if you need anything, please let me know. I'll be happy to talk and work through some things. So until next time, I'll see you next week. Bye.